One thing I really like about Neil Gorsuch is that he's a Westerner. We have a lack of geographic diversity on the court. 5 of the 8 current justices were born in either New York or New Jersey, 2 from California, which is not really the West, let's face it, not if you're from San Francisco. So he's dealt with issues that we deal with a lot in Arizona in terms of land use and tribal issues. So he'll add that perspective to the court. We spoke a lot during the hearings about separation of powers, about religious freedom, about Second Amendment, about the role of precedent. And he was, I thought, extremely astute. Obviously well prepared, but he doesn't need handlers. He's a very accomplished, smart jurist. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as the questions come in. But anyway, I appreciate you being on, and we'll go ahead and start getting to the questions. Again, if you want to get queued up, ask or press *3, and you'll be prompted. Again, *3, and you'll be prompted. So let's go ahead and go to Shirley in Camp Verde. Shirley, are you there?
Giving us this opportunity. And what I would like to know is why it's taken so long to get him to even to this point. We need a justice, and I don't understand why it's taken so long.
Well, he was just named by President Trump just about a month and a half ago, so this is actually a pretty speedy process. He's gone through the hearings this week. On Monday, we'll have what's called a markup. The Democrats have the opportunity to postpone after the markup starts for another week, which I think they'll likely do. So it will be on April 3rd that we'll have the final committee vote. But Shirley brings up a good point. It seems like a long time, but this is one of the most important functions the Senate performs, and so we want to make sure it's done right, and I think we're doing it about as fast as the process will allow. But great question. We'll move on to another. Let's go ahead. Michael, are you there?
Flake, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. I was curious. I don't know a lot about Judge Gorsuch, and I know that he was nominated, obviously, by President Trump. I voted for President Trump. And I wanted to know, what are some of the pros and cons about confirming him with a yes vote to become a Supreme Court justice?
Well, on the pro side, he is a conservative, but he's not outside of the mainstream. The Democrats are trying to paint him as such, but he's a conservative, thoughtful jurist who considers himself very much in the mold of Antonin Scalia, the justice he'll replace, who I think we all have a lot of respect for. He considers himself an originalist, one who looks at the text of the Constitution and doesn't try to infer what the Founding Fathers intended, but what he reads. He's also a textualist, one who looks at statutes as the Congress intended, not as what he would like to see. So I don't think he's one that's going to be legislating from the bench, and that's the biggest plus, I think, for Neil Gorsuch. He's young as well. He's 49 years old, so he's likely to be on the court for a long time. That's a good thing. So thanks for that question, Fern, in Arizona City.
Yes, Senator, I am wondering, and I hope that you are planning very strongly on voting for his approval. Are you?
I am. I went in, when I first heard his name, I was pleased that he was named. I had hoped that the hearings would go like this. Let me tell you, I heard nothing in the hearing that gave me any pause in terms of voting for him. And I can tell you in terms of qualifications, which it used to be that the Senate would look mostly at qualifications, not philosophy. He would get 100 votes from the Senate if he would have been named in the 1980s. or perhaps even the 90s. So he's immensely qualified and very smart. So I think he's a great addition to the court. And for the people I talk to, family and friends from Arizona, most of them, when they were picking a president, thought that the Supreme Court was an extremely important issue. And for those who had that at the top of their list, I think that they got exactly who they wanted. Neil Gorsuch is a good man. So
yes, amen.
Anyway, so thank you so much for that question, Fern, and we'll move on to Ann.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ann, are you there? I'm sorry. Ann, are you there? Okay, we'll try that one more time. Ann, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you for the phone town meeting, and I agree that Gorsuch seems to be a very good candidate, so that will be good. I just am concerned that Merrick Garland didn't get a chance to go through this process, and I just want to encourage you to not be so. I wish there would be more bipartisanism in the Congress. That sometimes the Democrats have a good idea, and seems like the Republicans just 100% go down the line, like all of Trump's cabinet nominees, some of which were not good at all, some of which were not qualified at all, but because it was Republican, all the Republicans voted for them. And I just don't think that's good, and I wish that the Republicans would not have been so obstructionist during the Obama administration, and I think the Democrats will show us how to compromise and get something accomplished.
All right. Hey, thank you, Ann. That's a great question. And you do bring up a good point. It seems like sometimes just Republicans will support a Republican president, the Democrats will support a Democrat, and we don't see much bipartisanship. I agree that there's too little of it. Let me say, with President Obama, I wasn't there during his first, or I wasn't in the Senate during his first term, so I didn't have an opportunity to vote on many of his cabinet appointees and haven't had the opportunity on the Supreme Court yet. But of the cabinet appointees that cycled in and out and that I did have an opportunity, I supported most of them because I feel that elections have consequences. And if the person is qualified, then that ought to be the most important thing that we look at. And sometimes I voted for people that I didn't agree with philosophically, but I felt that they were qualified and the president ought to get his or her people. So you bring up a good point, and I agree with you. With regard to Merrick Garland, let me say that he was nominated by President Obama last year, did not get a hearing. Some people think that the Senate was breaking with precedent there. The truth is the Senate was complying with precedent there. You'd have to go back to 1888 to find a scenario where the president appointed someone and the Senate of an opposite party confirmed that nominee during an election year. So more often than not, when it's in an election year and the election has already started, when some primaries have already happened, then the party in the Senate, controlling the Senate, will defer until the next election. So I think that kind of followed precedent. But anyway, we got a great pick with Merrick Garland. And so thank you for that question. We'll go on to Ruth in Scottsdale. Ruth, are you there?
Oh, hello, Senator Flake. Thank you very much. I just wanted to know if you had a feeling of how it was going toward his confirmation. Did you get a feeling?
Yeah, great question. I do think that I certainly don't know of any Republicans who won't support him, and I know that a number of Democrats would like to as well. I've talked to some of them, and I do believe that he will get a number of Democratic votes, whether or not it will be 60 votes to avoid a filibuster. is a question we don't know yet, and we'll have to put it to a vote in a couple of weeks and see what it does on the floor. But I can tell you the Democrats on committee asked a lot of hard questions. They felt that he tried to avoid answering them. In truth, a justice, when he's being interviewed or she is being interviewed, really can't answer questions about cases they might hear. And so I thought that he was as circumspect as he needed to be, but gave us a pretty good window into his philosophy. But when you've decided, 2,700 cases, then we're able to see a pretty good window into his philosophy and the way he would judge. So I was pleased with the hearing, and I think, frankly, the Democrats and everybody on the committee had to be impressed with his demeanor as well. So, but that's a great question. Let's go to Cheryl in Sun City.
Good evening, Mr. Flake. I appreciate you allowing me on this phone call. I'm probably one of the only independents on the call. My question is, I understand that all the Republicans feel that replacing the nominee on the court is going to take the place of the justice that passed away. And I've read his filings, I've listened to the hearings, and I find that he's probably to the right of Attila the Hun for the most things. Is there any chance that once you get this replacement in for Scalia, we can get someone who's more middle of the road nominated to the court so that everybody in this country has a voice on the court, not just people on the right?
Hey, thank you, Cheryl. Let me just say that I know that some were trying to paint him as to the right of Attila the Hun or somebody on the right, but let me just tell you about his record. I mentioned that he's decided about 2,700 cases. Of those 2,700, he was in the majority, 99% of the time. He was in the majority on deciding those cases, and 97% of the time, it was a unanimous decision among his colleagues. And it's a very split court in terms of who nominated whom. I think 7 were nominated by a Democrat president and 5 by a Republican during most of his time. So the notion that he's out of the mainstream or far right is belied by his record on the court. And I think if you watched those hearings, you saw a guy that is smart. Certainly he's conservative, but he's not out of the mainstream at all. So, but I appreciate that question. And let's go to Timothy. Timothy, are you there? Timothy?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
I guess you're calling on me the second time, and I was just concerned about how the judge feels about the Second Amendment and gun rights.
Right. Well, the judge was asked that question a few times, just in terms of precedent. You had the Heller decision, which he considers a Supreme Court precedent that affirms the right of an individual to carry to have Second Amendment privileges or rights, and so he considers that precedent, and so you could say that he's in favor of the Second Amendment, but that's as far as you would go. He would not say how he would decide on an individual case, but certainly he affirms that precedent of the Second Amendment through the Heller case. Let's go to Gary. Gary, are you there?
Hi, it's Jerry and Senator Flake. Thank you for taking my call. That's quite all right. To follow up on that, My concern is that the NRA has made it very clear that Supreme Court nominations is one of their top legislative objectives. And considering they invested $30 million into the Trump campaign, I'm concerned that when the Gorsuch nomination was announced, that the NRA's prime lobbyist, Wayne LaPierre, was sitting next to the president. How do you address the idea that this nomination and our concerns that this nomination really was unduly influenced by special interest, private money, and, the gun lobby, and not really just picks strictly on judicial merits?
No, I think that President Trump, during the campaign, actually, it was probably the most transparent process that any of us have ever seen. He put out a list of 21 jurists that he said, I'll choose from this list. No president has ever done that. Elections have consequences, and when a president is elected, you can expect him to name people that fit with his philosophy. And I think certainly that's what happened here. But it was a very transparent process. Like I said, I don't think that Judge Gorsuch is beholden to any special interest. He mentioned throughout his 20 hours of testimony, I don't know how many times he said it, but multiple times, I only speak for me. Nobody speaks for me. I follow the law wherever it takes me. So I don't think that he's going to be beholden to any group, whether it's the NRA, or corporations or any lobbyists or anything else. He spoke often. The Democrats kept trying to bring up, are you for the big guy or the little guy? And he mentioned again and again that he follows the law where it takes him. And so I think that it would be unfair to say that he'd be captive of any special interest. Thanks for the call. Charles in Peoria.
Hi, Senator Flake. Hi, how are you, Senator Flake?
Just great. It's great. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. My wife and I have been watching the confirmation hearings, and we feel that Judge Gorsuch will be an excellent choice for the Supreme Court because we feel that he would be a constitutionalist that will follow the letter of the law, and that he would be impartial, and that regardless of party, he would act in a fair and impartial manner. My other question for you is that we need to support our president in his border control and border enforcement, because look at the situation that happened in Great Britain. This has been a really dangerous thing, and it's going to sooner or later it's going to be coming to our country because we have porous borders. This past president that we have had has done nothing to protect the American people. What are your thoughts?
Well, I certainly agree with your point that we need to protect the border. Certainly the president made that clear during the campaign that he intends to do that. What form that will take is still under discussion. What kind of barriers on the border? Is it a wall? Is it a fence? I believe it'll likely be a combination of all of the above. We have a border that's over 2,000 miles long, just our southern border. So I think it's going to be a combination of things that we need to do, but it's going to be manpower, it's going to be surveillance, and also interior enforcement to turn off the magnet that brings people here for jobs that they can get illegally. That shouldn't happen. So there's a lot that needs to be done. We also need to do better vetting, obviously, to make sure that those who come here on visas don't mean us harm. That will be going on as well. So I appreciate your concern there, and we're trying to do it. So let me remind you again, if you want to call or want to ask a question, press *3 on your phone, *3 on your phone, and we'll go to Stephen. Stephen, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for speaking with me. One of the previous callers asked part of my question. I guess what I'm kind of curious about is, do you have a feel or how many of the Democratic senators would be favorable towards Judge Gorsuch?
Good question, Stephen. I'm not certain there. Some people do counts of 5 to as many as 11 or 12. If it gets to 11 or 12, it may be 20. We just don't know. Certainly, so far, no Democrat has indicated a willingness or certainty that they will vote for the judge. And Senator Schumer has called for the process to be stopped until we learn more about the Russian investigation, for example. So it doesn't seem that the leader, at least on the Democratic side, wants to move ahead. But I'm certain that we will move ahead. And in the end, the Democrats, as you know, have pulled the nuclear option, meaning that with regard to all court appointees or the president's cabinet or any other nominations, what's called the executive calendar. The Supreme Court, however, still requires 60 votes. There is talk of simply returning to Senate precedent as it was prior to 2003. Prior to 2003, nobody ever filibustered a Supreme Court nominee. It just wasn't done. You didn't support, or I'm sorry, you didn't filibuster the president's nominees, and there's talk of returning to that by simply finishing off the president's executive calendar in terms of what's subject to a filibuster. I hope that we don't have to do that. I hope that we can get 60 votes on the president's executive calendar, but we just don't know right now. We'll see when we move ahead. Frank Henry, are you there?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. If the nuclear option has to be pulled, will you and the rest of the senators follow your rules and do so? Because you, according to the Constitution, you have the power of your own rules. Old laws, rules that have been sitting around from previous Senate sessions, so to say, are just that, old rules. Now you are in the hot spot. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a question that I just answered a bit of, but let me tell you where I am on that. If it comes to it, if we need to pull the nuclear option on the last part of the president's executive calendar, I will vote to do so. I wish that we could return to a time when simply nobody would filibuster. If you think back, not too long ago, two of the most controversial Supreme Court nominees of our time, Judge Bork and then Clarence Thomas, neither of those individuals was filibustered. They both had a vote on the Senate floor. And keep in mind that it only takes one senator, just one, any senator of 100 can call to require a cloture vote, or one senator can filibuster that. But they didn't because that's just the way the Senate used to work. I think we need to return to that time. I wish we could do it just by behavior rather than rules changes. But I need to differentiate between the president's executive calendar and the legislative calendar. I do not want to get rid of the filibuster with regard to legislation. And I can tell you it's going to be frustrating for Republicans when we get to June and we start getting past reconciliation and past all the nominations and we're moving to regular legislation. It's going to be very frustrating when the Democrats won't give us 60 votes for a lot of things that we want 60 votes on. But I think if you believe in limited government, then the Senate rules a requirement to get 60 votes helps us more than it hurts us. And I think we have to look into the future. We don't want a time when, as a Republican, when Democrats would control both chambers in the White House and be able to push any legislation they wanted to just with 51 votes. So that's how I feel on it. So let's go ahead to Verla in Phoenix. Are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
And I have a question for you. There has been so much withheld by the Republicans the past 8 years, and it just looked like nothing was getting done. And now the reverse is there, where the Republicans are more in control, and we come up with a Supreme Court justice to be nominated. Right. What has been done to heal that divide? It seems like we're caught up on issues, but there isn't anything that's healing the big divide in our country. I know President Trump is always saying he's there for all people, and at the same time saying very negative things about the people that are on the other side. What are you seeing in this, just even in this one event of getting this nominee appointed? Right. How do we go about reaching across the aisle with the real pain that the Democrats didn't get to put their person up? What's been done to, if we don't get at that, we keep having this great division in our country. I'm wondering what you see could be done.
Well, thank you, Verla. That's a great question. That troubles me as well. And let me tell you, with the big issues that we have to solve, the biggest one, in my view, being our massive debt and deficit, our budget issues, that can only be done if we reach across the aisle. No one party, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, if we control now the House, the Senate, and the White House, but we don't have 60 votes. But even if we did have 60 votes, there's really no way politically that our party would move ahead and fix the entitlement programs that we need to fix in order to solve our debt and deficit problem. It takes both parties kind of holding hands and jumping together and sharing the political risk. So I think Verla couldn't be more right on this, and I hope that the Gorsuch nomination, I hope that it breeds some bipartisan support, and that'll be a start because, as I mentioned, once we get past the nominations, most of which can be done with 51 votes, the budget reconciliation, that can be done with 51 votes. Some of the so-called CRAs or Congressional Review Act things can be done with a bare majority. But everything else is going to require 60 votes, and so we'd better start learning to get along, or we're going to be in trouble in the next couple of years just with regard to the budget. Sylvia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. In Tucson.
Right.
Thank you very much for having this forum. I appreciate it. I'm going to follow up on what Verla asked and said, because you talked about reaching across the aisle, and my question involves what I see as the hypocrisy in what Republicans have done with blocking for a year Merrick Garland's nomination and then being told they shouldn't use the filibuster, and that Bork and Thomas did not have a filibuster, but there wasn't this situation where a whole year went by with one party who kept the president from having his nominee. In my view, this is Merrick Garland's seat, and I don't see any healing with people across the aisle until Republicans acknowledge from the very get-go that Mitch McConnell said, we will not let Obama have one victory. So how do you reach across the aisle to Democrats when Republicans act like this?
Right. Well, thank you, Sylvia. As I mentioned before, with regard to Merrick Garland, I thought that he was an honorable judge, and I feel badly that he was nominated and waited without a hearing. Having said that, like I said, what was done last year was not unprecedented. In fact, it followed precedent more than it didn't. You'd have to go back to 1888, as I mentioned, to find a time when the president was in one party, the Senate was in the other, and the president's nominee moved through during an election year. That's simply how it's been for more than 100 years. So I know that there are raw feelings on the other side. They feel that this should be Merrick Garland's seat, but this is elections have consequences, and I mentioned during the time President Trump made it very clear, the type of justice that he would appoint, and I think that people do understand that. Politics is never completely removed from the process. It's very much part of the process. But I do hope that we can have bipartisan support. And as I mentioned, my record is one of supporting the president's nominees by and large, unless I found them unqualified. And so I voted and took a lot of heat from some of my Republican colleagues for supporting some of the president's nominees, President Obama's nominees. But I felt they were unqualified. Elections have consequences, and the president ought to get his people. So anyway, let's go on, move on. Thank you for that great question. Let's see. How about James in Tucson? Are you there, James?
Yes, I am. Hi, Senator Flake. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Fine. Senator Flake, I'm a liberal Democrat. I did not vote for President Trump. One of my biggest concerns is voter suppression, especially minority voter suppression. Do you have a sense that Judge Gorsuch will support or will protect voting rights, especially minority voting rights?
I do. I believe that Judge Gorsuch will support everyone voting. I think that's one of the bedrock principles that we have in this country, is your ability to vote. And I would hope and I would fully expect him to support that. So I do think that he will, and thanks for that question. Let's go to Richard in Saddlebrook. You there?
Yes. Thank you for taking my call, Senator Flake.
Sure.
I appreciated hearing. I've been watching the hearings, and I appreciated you stating that you would be voting for Judge Gorsuch. There was one concern that I have, and you've mentioned this several times in your conversations with other callers, and it has to do with philosophy. Many people, in my opinion, are qualified to do a lot of things,
right,
particularly people in the area of law. However, to me, the division comes in the philosophical area. On the Supreme Court, my leaning is that we don't have a living constitution. We have a strict constitution of originality. Therefore, if a person comes, and we're going to have more of them come during this 4-year period, comes before the Senate, and they have full qualifications, however, they have a philosophy that mixes with that qualification, I take it you'd vote for them anyway, whether they're a constitutionalist or a living Constitution person.
Well,
I'm confused by how you answer these questions.
Well, I think that qualifications do matter, and somebody's philosophy in terms of being an originalist or not wanting to legislate from the bench. Obviously, you'll have varying degrees depending on where they are, but where they are philosophically. But there may be people who simply are unqualified who are nominated by a president. And if that is the case, I'd certainly not vote for them. When you have somebody like Gorsuch, who has served on the 10th Circuit for 10 years and has an extensive record, that you can not just look at his, his LSAT or his, record in college or what he's done as a private attorney, but you can look at how he's operated as a judge, deciding many of the cases that will go up to the Supreme Court eventually. I mentioned the 2,700 cases that he participated in. He was overturned only once, and that was on some procedural ground. And in fact, according to the Congressional Research Service, if you look at him and his colleagues that he served with, he was the judge that was overturned the least in terms of terms when he wrote in terms of the majority or in concurrence. So I think that he's a very qualified judge, and I'm glad to support him. So anyway, let's go on. How about Judy from Tucson? Judy, are you there? Judy, are you there? Oh, can't see that one. Andrew, are you there? Andrew, are you there?
Sorry, I had you on mute. I didn't want to.
Okay.
I'm at the gym.
No problem.
So you've said multiple times tonight that elections have consequences. But another thing that has consequences that Republicans don't really seem to believe in so much is climate change. I've got 2 young girls. I worry about their future. CO2 levels have just hit record highs for the second time in 2 years. You agreed to nominate Scott Pruitt, who has stated that CO2, and I'm probably paraphrasing here, CO2 hasn't contributed to climate change, which is demonstrably false. Basically, what I've been able to get from what I've read about you is your opinion is that climate change is happening, but we really don't know what's causing it. There's really not much that we could have done. The science disagrees with you. I could rattle off thousands of peer-reviewed studies that disagree with you. My question is this. I respect you. You're my senator. I think this is awesome that you're doing it. But the science disagrees with you. What would it take to at least consider that you're wrong? I know it's hard. I hate being proven wrong. But, climate change has consequences. And, if we live on a planet with 6 degrees of warming, we're looking at an extinction level event. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. I'm trying to be sincere. I don't think this is a left issue. I don't think this is a right issue. This is a human issue. And we can talk about market solutions or regulatory solutions, but we can't have half of the government that says, no, it's China. And the other half going, no, look, the science, we can prove it, is right. So what will it take to get the Republicans on board with real solutions to climate change? And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think you may have misunderstood my position. You may find Republicans who don't believe that the climate is warming. I'm not one of them. We do have warming, and I do believe the science that says that mankind has contributed to it. The question is, what policies should we adopt that will really make a difference? And I've been frustrated that some of the policies put forward sound nice and they're politically correct, but they won't do enough to actually make a difference. For example, if we're going to make a difference with CO2, we've got to go to sources that don't produce CO2. Obviously, renewables are there. We're increasing with renewables, and that's great. But you've got to have baseload power that's low carbon, and there's nothing that will do more than that than nuclear. But I have a hard time convincing my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to do what it's going to take to increase the percentage of nuclear power that we have that combined with renewables will provide both baseload and surge power that we need to actually make a difference. So like I said, I'm not one of those who has buried my head in the sand and is not agreeing with science. I just believe that if we agree with the science, then let's agree with the science and do things that will actually make the biggest difference. But thanks. That's a great question. Again, if you want to ask a question, press *3. We have a lot of people in the queue. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But let's go to Mark in Mesa.
Senator, Supreme Court justices, once they get on the court, pretty much go wherever they want to go, and they don't necessarily follow the philosophy that we thought that they were appointed to. But I'm not concerned about that with Judge Gorsuch. What I'm really concerned about is whether the conservative balance is going to change with his appointment or confirmation, but whether another justice is going to have to be appointed from President Trump that will sway that difference from liberal to conservative.
Well, that's a very astute question, Mark. Yes, this Justice Gorsuch, if he's successful, will replace Justice Scalia. It will most likely simply maintain the kind of philosophical balance that we have on the court. The next justice that is named, depending on who that justice replaces, whether it's Justice Kennedy or Justice Ginsburg, it could make a big difference in terms of the balance of the court. So if you think that this one is a battle, wait till the next one. In terms of opposition in the Senate from certain quarters. So yeah, I do agree that with Judge Gorsuch, given his long record as a judge, we know what we're getting a lot more than perhaps somebody like David Souter, who was named by President Bush back in the 90s, Bush 41, but then quickly kind of aligned with more of the liberal wing on the court. I agree with Mark that we won't have to worry about that with Judge Gorsuch as much. But great question. Again, if you want to ask a question, we have about, how long do we have? Asking about 15 minutes. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So thank you. Let's go to Carol in Tucson. Carol?
Yes, I had asked you with regard to what had happened today with Congressman Nunes going to the president with whatever information he had, whether I believe that the independence of the committee has been compromised, and I wanted to know how you feel about selecting an independent committee to investigate the current situation with the Russian involvement.
Well, I have to say I was very troubled by what I saw today. I was in hearings, the Gorsuch hearings all day, and so I just got bits and pieces as I came out for votes. But apparently Devin Nunes, who chairs the Intelligence Committee on the House side, had information with regard to eavesdropping or wiretaps or surveillance, or who had been surveilled, and went to the White House and talked to the president about it before talking to his counterpart, his ranking minority member, Democrat, on the committee. That seems, in my view, to break with protocol, and I know I've been calling, some have been calling for an independent committee or a commission to look at this Russian angle. I've said that I thought that the committees in the Congress could do that on their own, that we can go through regular order. I hope that's still the case. But what happened today doesn't do much for those of us who believe that the Congress can do it on its own.
Well, Senator
it was
McCain,
very, very concerning to me.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Senator McCain came out and requested it today. And I feel very strongly that Senator McCain and Senator Graham are very strong about making sure this is an independent thing. I also want to compliment you for your behavior during the campaign and that the independence that you showed. I respect that.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Carol. And we're sticking with the Carols here. Carol in Mesa. Go ahead, Carol.
They won't get to me because they asked.
I'm sorry, this is Joyce in Scottsdale. Go ahead, Joyce.
Oh, hi, Senator Flake. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to know, I know you keep saying that elections have consequences. However, Trump was not elected by the majority of people in this country, despite what he thinks. So the majority of people don't always agree with him. And one of the things he said with nominating a Supreme Court justice was he wanted someone who would overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, this is a law, a right that I worked very hard for in the 60s to have, so that we would have this right in this country. How do you feel about this? I mean, this is one of the things that Trump said. Exactly, this is why he was nominating someone like that. And the second thing is about the budget. Again, elections have consequences, but the majority of people are going to be hurt by his budget. How do you feel about these two issues?
Well, thank you. Actually, Judge Gorsuch was asked the question if President Trump, when he nominated him, if he told him that he needed to go ahead and repeal Roe versus Wade. He said, if he had asked that of me, I would have walked out, and that would have been the end of the interview. and I respect that. A judge shouldn't ever say what he will do or not on an issue like that. He'll have to look at the law, look at what challenge comes up through the courts, and deal with precedent. One thing he did say about Roe versus Wade, as he said about other issues, that this is a long-held precedent, and it would have to be dealt with as such. And I respect that. With regard to President Trump's budget, no president has his budget moved through the Congress without a change. And there are parts of the president's budget that I like. He's cutting a lot of programs, I think, that should have been cut. But there are certain programs, for example, in Arizona, we have something called SCAP funding. It's an acronym for basically saying that the federal government will reimburse some of our local governments for dealing with illegal aliens who really are the responsibility when they come across the border of the federal government. That's something that every president, Republican or Democrat, has zeroed out in the budget. But when it gets to the Congress, we Arizona senators and members of the House make sure that that's put back in, because it's only proper that the federal government reimburse on that. So that's just one example of one thing that will change when the budget comes through the House and the Senate. But the president has come with a pretty bold budget in terms of some of the cuts or increases with this defense spending. I like some of it. There are parts that I don't like. One thing I desperately think we need to do is dip into mandatory spending. Most of our budget is mandatory. It's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that we really aren't changing much. And until we do, or changing at all, until we do, we're not going to get a handle on the budget. So that's a great question. We only have time for a few more, but please hang on as long as you can. I'll try to get to as many of these as we can. Jerry in Tucson. Jerry, are you there?
I am here, Senator. I'm here, Senator. Thank you for taking my call. First, I want to say I appreciate you giving us this forum and this chance to ask questions. I would appreciate it if you would have some live face-to-face town hall meetings around the state. I think it's important that we be able to look you in the eyes when you answer our questions, just so we can kind of get a better read on things. My question today has to do with the Committee on Border Security and Immigration. I know there is a plan to build a wall along the border. As I'm sure you are aware, the Teletown Reservation spans both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border there. And I think that Native Americans have endured too much injustice and too much indignity at the hands of the U.S. government. And I really don't think it's appropriate for us to build a wall through their land and cut folks off from being able to see their families or the resting places of their loved ones. And I want to know if you have a plan how you're going to deal with that issue.
Hey, that's a great question, Jerry. This is something that we deal with quite a bit. At times, we've had quite a bit of traffic coming up through the Teletown Nation. And you're right, a lot of these lands, traditionally you've had families going back and forth. They live along the border, and some will start the day in Mexico and end the day in Arizona, or vice versa, just because they can cross freely and have family on both sides. That's going to be an issue that we obviously deal with. Right now, we don't have a lot of foot traffic or illegal traffic coming across the border there. Gratefully, over the past few years, and you can say it's for the economy or increased enforcement, probably a combination of reasons. We were at about the lowest levels of illegal traffic across our southern border, at least the Arizona border, that we've been in a long time. And that's a good sign. Glad to see that. The economy in Mexico is doing better. That helps us quite a bit. Our economy in Mexico, and also as our economy picks up in Arizona, we may actually have to put some more resources on the border. But so far, we're doing better this year. Anyway, let's go ahead and Carson in Mesa. Carson, are you there? We may have time for one more question after this.
Yes, I'm here.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I think that Garland is a good guy, and I'd like to see him in a future seat, but I feel that this is Justice Scalia's seat and that Garland would have misbalanced the Supreme Court. I believe that preventing much of Obama's actions was a balance of power against an extremist president, but on to my question. I know this is off topic, but I'm worried that the replacement of Obamacare is still socialist with individual mandates. If we want a conservative solution, then why don't we simply repeal Obamacare without replacement and give health care over to the states, where the right of health care belongs?
Thanks for that question. Right now, part of the difficulty we're having with a repeal and replacement plan is that you have to honor contracts, and there are contracts with Obamacare that go for the next 2 years. You already have people paying premiums based on contracts that were entered into that will go for the next 2 years. So it's not as easy as it seems to be able to just replace or repeal a plan and replace it. Obviously, if you live in Arizona, we are at ground zero for the failure of the Obamacare exchange. In every county around the state, in all 15, you pay more on average for your health care premium than you do for your mortgage. If you happen to live in Pinal County and you're on the exchange, you're paying twice on the average if you're a family of 4 for your mortgage, for your health care premium than you are for your mortgage. And so it's completely unaffordable. And it's not. It can't be sustained. Our budget can't sustain it. We can't continue or subsidize more heavily to keep the insurance market open. So it needs to be changed. That's the bottom line. Obamacare has failed. It needs to be replaced. The question is how we do it without pulling the rug out from under people in Arizona. Most people have taken advantage of Obamacare through Medicaid expansion, our access program, and that's a difficult thing to change and to deal with without blowing a real hole in Arizona's budget, and doing it in a way that can be sustained. So those are the things that we're going through mostly in the House this week, and hopefully the bill, we can be dealing with it in the Senate next week. But we're trying to get through that. I think we can have time for one more question. One more question. Let's see. Let's go to most of the questions, gratefully, are about the Supreme Court, given what's going on right now. But let's go to one that, all right, Robert in Phoenix.
Yes.
You there?
Yes, Flake. Senator Flake, thank you for accepting my call. My main call is I voted. I'm a registered Democrat. I'll be saying that right up front. I'm a registered Democrat, and I've been voting ever since Lyndon B. Johnson. And I have yet to see the Democrats and the Republicans reach across the table very much. They fight each other like tooth and nail. And I'm not blaming the Democrats and I'm not blaming the Republicans. What I don't understand is why they have to fight so much. Just like this confirmation for the Supreme Court. I've watched it, there were 5 senators asked very identically the same question, only worded it a couple different words in there, and they don't listen to each other. Right. And then I've listened to C-SPAN, and it reminds me of like a bunch of 10-year-old kids out in the playground fighting. They just try to beat out each other. They ain't there to work for the people. They're working there for themselves. They don't have the care for the people and what they were elected to do. Right. And a lot of these calls tonight were strictly Democrats. I can tell that. Right. But I'll say, too, another thing. President Trump, why is it that the people, the media, and everybody else won't let him alone and let him have a chance? They've been cutting him all which ways possible ever since he was elected.
Well, thank you, Robert. As I've mentioned before, I share your concern about the inability to reach across the aisle. We're going to need to do it in the coming months if we are going to solve the problems with Obamacare, for example. As soon as we get past reconciliation, we're going to have the improvements and the replacement part of Obamacare are going to need to be, done with a 60-vote, requirement in the Senate. So we're going to have to reach across the aisle. I hope we can, and I think that we can get enough of our Democratic friends across the aisle on this issue to actually do what we need to do. I hope that's the case. Somebody had asked about a live town hall. I will be doing live town halls in the coming months. It's been difficult now. We, as Leader McConnell likes to say, we're in the personnel business in the Senate, and the other party has not been too cooperative, and so we've had to invoke cloture or basically have we haven't been able to get unanimous consent on any of the cabinet nominees, which has meant that we don't know if we're going to be home for the weekends or not. So it's been tough to schedule town halls. I certainly wouldn't want to schedule one and then have to cancel it. So we're spending a lot more time back here than we usually do. But in the coming months, I look very much forward to having live town halls around the state. So I appreciate your patience there, and I know that a lot of people have questions that I certainly want to answer to the best of my ability. But thank you so much for being on the call. Let me say, if you want to hear the questions that I asked during the process and the speeches that I've given on the Senate floor with regard to Justice or Judge Gorsuch, you can go to flake.senate.gov/Supreme Court. Again, that's flake.senate.gov/Supreme Court. And you can find really any of the activity with regard to this nomination. This is, as I mentioned, it's been a privilege to be part of this the committee, Judiciary Committee on the Senate. This is really historic to be here when a Supreme Court nominee goes through the Senate. As I mentioned, that's where the real legacy is left for a president. And it was an honor to be part of the hearings this week and part of this process. And I appreciate all of you being online. We've had thousands of Arizonans hang on the line. I know we were only able to get to a fraction of you. I tried to take as many calls as possible. We'll be having more telephone town halls in the future as well as live ones as well. And I'll be getting around the state, and you can check on our website to see when we're hosting events. And my staff is always available if you have issues with regard to veterans issues or Social Security or Medicare or anything with any of the federal agencies. Please call my office at 602-840-1891, and you'll have us helping you there. So thank you so much for being on the call. Appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you all again.